Hello, everyone. This is Dan Barreto. I'm the president, CEO of FarmQ Global Consulting. This afternoon, I'm joined by Joseph Jimenez. Joe?
Hi, Joe Jimenez. I'm the managing director of Arches Consulting. How are you today?
And by Jim Morris.
Hi, everyone. Jim Morris here. I'm with NSF International, 30 years in the pharma industry, and happy to contribute to this conversation.
Okay, fantastic. So let's go straight to the point here. We know, Jim, that you have been watching our videos on what we call the PC Wrap. And we're wondering if we can get any reactions from you on the work that we've been doing in terms of trying to lead the industry to implementing protocol-based activities post-corona.
Yeah, I think it's great that you guys have begun your conversation around people, because that is really going to be a focus, is making sure that we have the right people in place to restart our operations. I think we can all appreciate that many companies have really ramped up and are not necessarily restarting, but some unit operations will be restarting. So one of the questions that I have is, when you say that there's going to be insufficient people, I think we could all appreciate that, because levels of absenteeism may go up in this corona environment that we're having to manage at this point in time. But how do we mitigate this risk in terms of insufficient people to restart operations?
Joe, you want to say something?
I guess one of the ways that we can do this, Jim, is if you talk about both the quality and the quantity of the people. Obviously, the numbers piece, I think, is pretty straightforward. But from the quality perspective, you want to make sure you have the folks with the right skills. And I think one of the key areas that's going to be needed is decision making. In other words, do you have the right individuals that are trained and that you trust in their decision-making capabilities, particularly the front line, let's say supervisors. I think that's maybe one of the most critical roles in manufacturing as well as in the laboratories for pharma and med device. Along the lines of decision-making, one of the things that empowers them is having, let's say, a clear guidance. And this is where the PC Wrap comes in, where you establish up front what the priorities should be, and that allows the folks, when they end up in a situation where the decision might be a little tricky. So in other words, maybe I'm bumping up on hold time on a particular process, how do I proceed forward, or do I? Where do I make that decision? Knowing what the expectation is as defined in the PC Wrap, I think, is critical.
Okay, that's great. That's a great answer. I might add to that, as we think about restart operations, we're going to think about who our subject matter experts are within a unit operation. One thing that companies should be thinking about in this environment is not who the subject matter expert is, but who is their backup in the event that they're not available, right, in order to make those good decisions regarding hold time and things of that nature. Okay, another question for you, Joe, since I'm looking straight at you, I'll take this one right back to you. You had made a comment in the first video that had to do with restarting operations, how there may be greater opportunity for failure. And perhaps you can expand on that, because that is going to be a sensitivity for many companies. Sure.
If I were to jump back to that decision-making question earlier, so you've got folks now that are qualified to make the appropriate decision on the floor. So when we shut down, it's a little bit different than, let's say, your typical annual routine shutdown, which is typically procedurally driven. You know exactly what you're closing down and what your procedures are to start back up. In this particular case, for those units or industries that actually did perform a shutdown or were impacted due to absenteeism, the suddenness of it is probably something more akin to an emergency or a power outage. So they probably have steps in place as to how to bring things back up. But when I talked about failures, I also meant the things that are outside of the normal routine, let's say the less controlled. One of the examples that I was thinking of is in manufacturing, sometimes you have a lot of lines that feed from tanks to another tank, et cetera. Are those properly cleaned? Were they cleaned? How's the documentation supporting that? Or even in the case of an HPLC, if it was shut down in the middle of a run, did you properly flush it at the end of its run? Do you have salts built up within the machine in some particular space? So having folks go through those failure type of processes, the thinking of those failures, I think can avoid some of the easier problems that you'll have for failure.
Let me just expound a little bit on that, because I
Sure.
think failure is also around the fact that the companies really need to understand the gaps that they are bringing to the resumption of operations. So if the companies are not in control of understanding those gaps, and they're not able to match, those gaps with the priorities that they have to bring forward, and with the people who have to do it, then they will be subject to failure. And I think it's also important to define what failure is all about, right? Is it failure to produce? Is it failure to get back to normal operation? Or is it in the end also failure to fulfill, regulatory expectations by the external? So I think all of these potential failures have to be considered as part of the discussion.
And if I may add to that, guys, there's as somebody who's close to the study of human error, one of the things that operations will need to be sensitive to is the fact that we'll be coming back to operations that we may be a little bit less familiar with, but we're also going to be distracted by what's going around
Right.
us due to the nature of the crisis that we're having to manage. So as supervisors, managers, and operations, do be thoughtful about the fact that you need to really plan for refreshing people before they restart an operation, and plan for refamiliarization with SOPs and batch records to the extent perhaps that you would not normally do during a normal restart. This is a unique restart.
Jim, would you formalize that as a requirement, let's say within your PC wrap? In other words, build in time for refresher training so that
I
folks
think,
know it really should be done?
yeah, I think that one of the nice things about the approach that you guys are putting forward is you're saying to managers, be proactive in this time. Plan for what you need to do to restart. It's not a normal restart. So that's an element that would make a lot of sense to include in your restart protocol, so that it's clear that refresher training is not just pure check the box refresher training. It's really active refresher training, perhaps even dry runs in some respects, whether it's in the laboratory or in manufacturing.
In part because some of this has to do with a certain risk-based approach that the companies will have to initiate. It's not going to be, routine operation for the first couple of months. So you're going to have to make decisions. You're going to have to take certain approaches where you're going to have to use some risk-based approach. And this is going to be new for a lot of people. So you really have to train them on how to make the best decisions that they can make so that they can get back to a normal operation. So I think that, understanding risk and then being able to justify it, because you're going to be asked about why did you make these decisions, is going to be very
Right.
important.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that, if I may, Dan, and ask a question about oversight. This is something that you had highlighted in the first video. And as you come back into operations, you put emphasis on the importance of oversight by management. Could you expand on that?
Sure. To me, oversight is it's about availability of the right people in the right location. So one of the things that is going to happen is that because of, everybody's going to try to get back to normal, there's going to be a lot of meetings, a lot of disruptions that will prevent people from actually being there where they are needed. I'm thinking the shop floor. The oversight is not just about being there to supervise, but it's about being there to support, to coach, to train, to troubleshoot, to do a number of things that people think that are not part of the oversight process. So when I talk about oversight, is availability, and it's about being able to be part of the solution, not being part of the problem.
One of the things, Dan, that we talked about is oversight, not just on first shift, but also, let's say, second shift, third shift, to make sure you have that coaching and guidance where it's needed, which typically sometimes does occur on those off shifts. The other piece I would add to your question, Jim, is the formal aspect of oversight. So in other words, building into your process a regular cadence of reviews, something similar to like a quality council, which you can maybe even build it into your quality council, or maybe you have a slightly different cadence, perhaps maybe initially more frequently, and then you fade it out to every 2 weeks, every month, etc. But to make sure you've got that loop going back and forth to ensure that all your processes are up to speed, and then that you folks are properly supported. You have redundancy built into the system. Your on-the-job training is working correctly, and you've got folks available to cover any other contingencies, because this is going to be waves.
That's right. It's not going away. So in some respects, and one of the terms that you guys had pulled out and used in the first video was the term remediation. And I believe what you're saying is in some respects, this is like a remediation program where you have a group of people available, almost like a SWAT team, to deal with the issues that will come up, undoubtedly will come up and need immediate attention. And good oversight will assure that that SWAT team, that group of players is available to answer the questions and to deal with the bottlenecks and to really quickly resolve issues as you get restarted.
And we called it remediation because what's going to happen is when you get back to routine operation, you're going to find that there were a number of things that were in significant state of backlog, whether it's a stability testing program activities, whether it's your annual product reviews.
Right.
So you're going to have to remediate these things. You're going to have to bring them back to normal operation. So that's what we mean by remediation. You could call it recovery also, but we felt that it was important to really emphasize that you really have to remediate these problems.
So to underline your recognition of this, the fact that companies need to be very proactive is important. How does this link, and perhaps this is the last question for you guys, is how does this link to inspection readiness?
Go ahead, Dan.
So for me, it has to do with inspection readiness because keep in mind that it is an expectation that the sites have to be inspection ready at all times. So this remediation program, I think the agencies will understand that you will come back with a certain level of delays and backlogs, but the agencies will expect that you have a plan in place to compensate, to remediate, to address these issues. So if you don't have the plan, then you've got a problem. And by the way, to me, the most important message that we can deliver today, which we have been delivering before, is your activities to prepare for that inspection start now, not when operations resume. You have to really start now. Joe?
The only thing I would add is that this PC wrap serves as a formal document which captures the basics of your decision making, so that upon reinspection, it should be very clear to whoever the reviewer is or the auditor where you assign priorities. So, for example, as we said in the first video, the GMPs don't go away. So you have your own SOPs. Are there aspects of your SOPs that need to be modified now, given the priorities that you have? What are your controls around those? How are you addressing those issues? And I think by having a protocol that drives the decision-making process allows you to share that. And I think while it might not change an observation, it could change the weight or the perception of that observation on how the site looks from an overall compliance perspective. Are you in a state of control or are you not? Did you just use this event as an excuse for poor decision-making, or are the poor decisions a reflection of poor management? And you want to be able to temper any of those questions before they come up.
So, Jim, I just wanted to say that you have given us some very challenging questions, and hopefully we have been able to answer satisfactorily. We do actually invite more of these questions, not only from people like yourself, but from other members of the industry, because we are so committed to making sure that we can support the industry to get back to a strong state of control. So at this point, I wanted to thank you for
Thank you, Jim.
Joining us, and we're looking forward maybe to another conversation with you, Jim.
It would be my pleasure, Dan and Joe. This
Great.
has been very value added. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Okay, take care, everybody. Bye.